Welcome back, everybody. So today we're continuing on with ancient Greece, and we're going to be talking about 5th century Athens. This should be a pretty quick little lecture, but our focus question is, why was democracy so integral to Athens' domestic and foreign policy? So why was it so important? Why was democracy such a central piece to their domestic and foreign policy? Okay, well, last time we talked about the Persian Wars, and there was never a third Persian War, but the Athenians and the other Greeks didn't know that. We know that from the hindsight of history, but they didn't. And so there was a big concern that the Persians might try to invade Greece again, or perhaps they would try to interfere with trade. Maybe they could starve Athens out, and this was a really big fear. And so the Athenians proposed to the other Greek city-states that they form into a league. And the purpose of this league would be to protect Greece from the Persians. And they would do this primarily through naval means. All right, so because Persia's in Asia and Greece is in Europe, with a strong navy patrolling the waters, the Persians would just really have no way of getting there. And the Athenians also wanted to ensure that they were going to be able to get grain into their city. And as a third objective, they also wanted to liberate the Ionian Greeks. Now, in this map, the Ionians are... Where's my pen? In this map, the Ionians, if you will recall, are right over here. And they were still under Persian domination ever since their failed revolution in 499. And so the point of this league was also to liberate these Greeks from the Persians. And so, as you'll recall, the way leagues work is they tend to be voluntary. And about 150 polises joined up onto the league. Most of these polises were in the east. Polises that had reason to fear the Persians more, perhaps. Now, importantly, Sparta did not join this league. This was going to be more of an Athenian thing. And the way that you joined the league, you had to pay dues. And the dues were that you could either pay in money or in ships. So some of the bigger Greek city-states that joined contributed ships, but some of the smaller ones just paid money, and this was their dues for being in the league. And so the league was successful. They managed to expel the Persians from Ionia. They managed to expel them from the part of Europe that the Persians had conquered way up here. And so pretty much a success. Now, one of the most important things that I want you to understand is how relevant the Navy was to Athens' democracy. You will remember that going all the way back to ancient Greece, your ability to fight and your political representation were closely intertwined, going all the way back to the Aristoi. Remember, they were originally they were the elite warriors. They made all the decisions. From the time of the rise of the hoplite, the middle class began to have more of a voice. One group that was locked out of military consideration, though, was the very poor. Because in order to be a soldier in Greece, you had to produce your own armor. And armor tended to be very expensive. And so really only middle class and wealthy people could take part as hoplites. The poor, if they were going to take part in all, maybe could throw some rocks or slingshots or couldn't do very much. But the Navy was a game changer. Because unlike armor that you had to produce yourself, ships and naval vessels were produced by the state, by Athens itself. And ships required many, many rowers. And so this meant that the poor could now take part in important military operations. And this was pretty critical because, again, your right to participate in government was closely intertwined in your military contribution to the state. And the Navy had really saved Greece, had really saved Athens during the Persian War. It had been these poor rowers who had manned the fleets, manned the triremes, that had really saved Greece. And it was these same rowers who were now bringing Athens success. And so this was a critical part of their democracy, and in fact led to a strengthening of it. Now, Athens was already democratic at this point, but became even more democratic, if that's possible. And this movement was most associated with the Athenian statesman Pericles, Periclean Athens, this is sometimes called. And Pericles was able to extend democratic participation by paying people to be in government. Now, we're accustomed to people who govern getting paychecks, but this was a novel idea back in ancient times. Being part of government was considered an honor. You didn't need to be paid. But of course, for many Athenians, they couldn't just take a day out of work. If they wanted to participate in the assembly, they would need to get paid. Or if they wanted to serve on juries, these critical parts of democracies, they would have to get paid. And so by paying people to participate, and by the way, Greek juries were huge, like 1,000 people. The assembly had thousands of people that would come out. This would free up even the poor to come and participate more in the democratic process. Pericles also had an ambitious building program around Athens, including the Acropolis, which we'll look at in a second, and something called the Long Walls, which will take part. And of course, this meant jobs for the poor. Now, I also want to mention, as far as the Delian League went, this league that Athens was the hegemon, the leader of, democracy was an important ingredient in the league as well. As a matter of fact, the Athenian Navy, the Delian League Navy, needed so many rowers that the Athenians didn't have enough people to do it. And so they would use rowers from throughout their league. And this was really popular with poor people throughout the Delian League. And all the different polis of the Delian League, the Athenian Navy was a very popular thing because there were always jobs. And also plunder. When you took over a city, you went on a naval expedition, you'd also get some plunder. And so the poor loved this. You could be at home rotting away on your little plot of land that you couldn't feed yourself in, or you had this great job in the Athenian Navy and were getting plunder and accolades and all sorts of things. Now, the Navy wasn't quite so popular with the wealthy because, well, I mentioned that city-states didn't actually have a lot of money to spend on things. And so it wasn't like they had a naval budget. And so ships tended to be, the financing of ships tended to be thrust onto the wealthy in something called a liturgy. Liturgy were basically like little projects that rich people would be obligated to do, like maybe pay for a festival or a ship, kind of like an adopt a ship program. All right, you got your name associated with the ship, but you had to pay for the crew and you had to pay for the upkeep of the ship. Kind of cool, but, you know, on the other hand, probably money you'd probably rather be spending somewhere else, but social pressure. And so the point is since this was so popular with the poor throughout their empire, in order to keep their league functioning, the Athenians tended to promote democracy. Makes sense, right? Their league is going to be popular among the poor, but not the rich. Not among oligarchs, people, you know, where there's a narrow form of government where the few rule. Maybe the Delian League wouldn't be so popular, but as long as there are democracies, then Athens and the Delian League are going to remain popular. Hopefully that makes sense. And so Athens actively promoted democracy throughout its league. Now, this 5th century Athens, this period of time, is sometimes called the Golden Age of Athens. And for good reason. If you happen to hear rumbling on this, there's a massive thunderstorm going on outside my window. If you suddenly hear me get electrocuted or something, I took one for the team. But anyways, I'm gonna push on. This is sometimes called the Golden Age of Athens, and for good reason. This is really when Greek civilization was at its climax. Athens, being the biggest and the most important of the Greek city-states, really led the way. Athens had approximately a population of about 300,000 at this point, by far the biggest city. It was really swimming in prosperity. Its merchant vessels went out exporting merchandise throughout the Mediterranean, bringing in the wares of the world into Athens. Athenian currency was widely accepted throughout the Mediterranean world. And culturally, Athens was really at its apogee. This is the time when the Parthenon is built. The Parthenon is this series of buildings located at the top of the Acropolis. The original Parthenon had been burnt by the Persians, but under Pericles, this new and better Parthenon was built. Many of the great sculptors of the Greek world came to Athens or lived there. The great dramatists produced their plays during this period of time. Philosophers like Socrates walked the streets of Athens at this time. So this is really the height of Greek culture. Now, I should mention that as the 5th century ground on, Athens' attitude toward the Delian League began to change. Increasingly, Athens stopped treating the other members like equal partners and more like subject territories. I already mentioned Athens meddling in the internal politics, promoting democracy, but really the Athenians stepped this up. In 454, the Athenians seized the League treasury, so everybody was supposed to pay into a common pot, and they brought it back to Athens from the temple that it was being stored at. Ostensibly, they did this because they wanted to protect it from getting stolen by the Persians, but the other members resented this, or at least many of them did. The Athenians also began to expand the league to city-states that hadn't joined voluntarily, essentially using their navy to force smaller and more vulnerable polis into the league. In addition to that, some Greek polis wanted to leave the league. They said, we don't really like the way you're behaving, Athens, and we'd like out. And Athens forbade that. As a matter of fact, they punished polis that tried to leave very, very harshly. Well, part of the argument for Athens' behavior was, well, everybody benefits from the League, right? All Greek city-states benefit from it, and so it's right that we force them to stay in the League. And so the expansion of Greece, the fact that it was regularly taking tribute from other Greek city-states, looked to some of the bigger states like Sparta as potentially dangerous. And so we'll see the outcome of that in our next lecture. So what I want you to do is I want you to think about this. Why was democracy so integral to Athens' domestic and foreign policy? I'll see you again for our next lecture. I'm going to take cover because it's getting wild out there with this lightning. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time.